let's use this opportunity to go on into the second part, where I would like to talk to you about conflict theory and the Ukraine war. You gave a wonderful talk about 2 months ago in Germany, in German, with a lot of slides, and we have a lot of theorizing about the conflict. And for anyone watching this, one of the most important things is that you actually distinguish between 3 different conflicts that are ongoing. A geopolitical war, West versus East, an interstate war, Russia versus Ukraine, and an intra-Ukrainian war, pro-Western versus pro-Russian groups. That's really, really important. And you say like they're separate, but they're intertwined.
Intermingled. And
intermingled. So secondly, you are most interested in these windows of opportunities, and we will come to that in just a second. Can you maybe tell us how you think these 3 wars actually intertwine?
Okay. Looking at the geopolitical, it's better not to say East-West, but to say transatlantic and Eurasian. And because the East is different now from the East in the Cold War. I mean, it was rather Soviet Union, Russia, and the satellite states, which now are independent states and tensed to or became members of the NATO, etc. So transatlantic and Eurasian. And so this has a longer story. And of course, it's rooted also in the former competition, East-West, communist and capitalist system, and who is going to govern the world, more or less, or to conquer the world. So, and this then, after the dissolving of the Soviet Union in 1991, and then when you had a growing Western bloc, NATO, when the former Soviet states became members like Czech Republic and Hungary and Poland first. And as I emphasize in also my slides and my speech, the Russian considerations that their security interests must be respected have been respected when Poland, Czech Republic and Hungary became members. But they were neglected when later the Baltic republics became members, and also when then the NATO established missile systems close to the Russian border, etc. So this had a longer story, and if I look at and when the invasion, when the war on the 24th of February last year started in the Ukraine, the geopolitical war actually was, if I look at my escalation model with the 9 steps, it was on stage 6, threats and counter threats, and not more at the moment before the invasion. Then the second war, the Russian-Ukrainian, actually the oldest roots are the Stalin period, because Ukraine was considered by the Bolsheviki as being a part of the Tsar Empire, of the old Russian Empire, and actually the own identity of Ukraine was not really appreciated or respected or recognized to that extent as the Ukrainian nationalist movement would have liked that it would have been recognized and respected. But there were old wounds because the Stalin system nationalized the agriculture on a very, very rude and cruel way, which means that that the Ukrainian agriculture, which was always the producer of grain for Russia and for many other countries, all the grain which was produced by the nationalized Ukrainian farmers was sent to Russia. And there was a horrible starvation in the Ukraine, and at approximately 2 million people died. And
around 1936.
Yes. And in Kiev, there exists a monument on one of the hills close to the old monastery, etc., which is always remembering this, what's called the
Holodomor.
Holodomor, yes, Holodomor. And this is in the collective memory of the Ukrainian people, not in the Russian collective memory. See? Then Second World War, occupation by German troops, and there existed an anti-Stalin or anti-Soviet or anti-Bolsheviki strong movement, a nationalist movement in the Ukraine, which cooperated with the German troops and joined fighting against the Russian army, the Red Army, till they lost this, of course. And all this is as well in the collective memory of Russia, of Russian people and Russian politicians, and of Ukrainian politicians. Then, when the Soviet Union was dissolved, there have been negotiations of Belarus, Russia, Ukraine, and some other in a small city, in a small town in Belarus, and the constitution for the Federation of the Independent States, as it is called. I don't know the English abbreviation of it. In German, is GUS.
It's CIS.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Yeah. And they had negotiated, but at the end, the Ukrainian did not sign it and not become a member of this. And the reason was that the Ukrainian government in those days refused that the Russians claimed to be again the dominating part of this in terms of policy, military, international politics, economy. This was refused by the Ukrainian government, so they did not become a member, only associated, and had some custom regulations, etc. And this was a very humiliating act for Belarus and for Russia, actually. And this is also one of the backgrounds of the Russian-Ukrainian tension. And this then, because at the same time, the extremist nationalistic Ukrainian movement, and a part of this is really more or less old Nazi oriented, yes, but not all of that. It's against the narrative of of President Putin that they all are actually fascists and like the German Nazis, etc. And so from 91 onwards, etc., then there started also another tension in terms of the Russian Ukrainian war, or roots of the war, that had to do with the Crimea, semi-peninsular Crimea. And well, it was always a part of the Russian Empire in Tsar times, etc. And you may remember that Khrushchev gave it in 1954 as a gift. He gave Crimea to Ukraine, but Crimea always had the most important harbors of the Navy, the Russian Navy, etc., and was also a very attractive holiday resort for pensioned rich people, etc., Russian people and Ukrainian people as well. And as a curiosity, in January 91, Crimea, which in the Stalin Soviet system had the status of an autonomous region, almost republic, autonomous republic region. And in January 91, the Crimea government, regional government, declared to be an independent sovereign state. Only in the autumn of the same year, the Ukraine declared to be an independent sovereign state and not longer a part of the Soviet Union. But Crimea did it earlier. So according to the understanding of the government of the Crimea, we were not anymore a part of Ukraine when the Ukrainian declared its independence in the autumn, in September. And this was a difficulty. And then you may remember perhaps that there have been referenda, manipulated referenda with the Russian-speaking people, etc. And when there have been the protests in Maidan in 2013 and 2014, which were actually started and dominated by rather nationalistic parts or parties or movements, more or less, then again the issue of, is the Peninsula Crimea still a member of the Ukraine, or is it an independent state and perhaps a member of the Russian Federation? This came up again. So all this came up again when the Russians then occupied in February 22 Ukraine, and now the intra-Ukrainian conflict. It had to do with, again, with the Crimea dispute. And if you look at the language map of the Ukraine, including also Crimea, then you will see that about 12 to 14 languages exist in the Ukraine. Polish, also German, also Hungarian, other languages as well. Crimea, Tatarian language of the Crimea, which was only spoken there, and some others. And when the nationalist government became, the nationalist movement became the government in 2013, 2014, then the first decision was that they were forbidding all other languages for official communication. And I said, if you look at the map of languages, you had regions in which the big majority was Russian speaking already for centuries. in others Ukrainian or Polish or Hungarian or even German or Romanian, etc. So a mixture of many, and you couldn't say that this is only Polish speaking or this is only Hungarian speaking, etc. They were intermingled, and as well, just as a natural process. And then against the decision of the Ukrainian, I would say, a nationalist government, that only Ukrainian language is the official language for communication with government and offices, etc., then have been very, very strong protest movements, mainly of the Russian-speaking people in, of course, Crimea, but in Odessa, in Dnipropetrovsk, and a lot of regions. And the idea was, as a member, as a part of the Ukraine, to get more respect for the rights of the cultural and language minorities. And this was refused. Not even more, there was a strong suppression of the protest, even by official Ukrainian military forces and police, etc. A real war, a real civil war. And then more and more, the protesting people in Donetsk and Lugansk and Odessa, etc., they also organized themselves in paramilitary organizations. And they got also support from Russia, from Russian people who chose for support for the Russian-speaking people, because you can imagine that many had grandchildren or grandparents there in Russia or here or there, etc. So this is, briefly speaking, the third. And all three were at different levels of escalation in February 22.
So the very important thing is that on your escalation ladder, they were at different stages, but they actually reinforced each other, right? Or abused each other. But that's why, in your theory, calling the Ukraine a proxy war is too short, right? That's not the nature of the conflict. The nature of the conflict is an interlocking of different levels of conflict. And can you? One thing that is crucial in your theory is that each level, you have 9, I will show them. Each level has like several sub-levels of so-called red lines or thresholds. Can you talk about the importance of these thresholds and how you then like get over the hunch when you fall on a lower level of escalation?
Okay. Maybe I illustrate it by looking at now at the well, on the territory of Ukraine, and after the invasion in February, and so that the intra-Ukrainian war actually was already on level 8, and the Russian-Ukrainian on level 7, which means the sanctions which were promised more or less at stage 6, threats and counter threats, they were implemented, executed, the sanctions. So I destroyed this and I punish you for this and this and this, and were responded by counter destructive activities. And if you now look at the Russian-Ukrainian war on the territory of the Ukraine, because that's for a long time, this was limited limited to the territory of Ukraine, while now you have the drone attacks in Moscow, etc., etc. But back to the Ukrainian territory. Also, this then was escalated to from level 7 to level 8, even on level 8, which means aiming at complete victory or destruction of the enemy, and a defeat of the enemy and own victory and destruction of the enemy. But there are red lines. How do you behave? Are you respecting international law in terms of war criminality, for instance? There are different red lines. The one is maybe war crimes happen because of a loss of a lack of control of the fighting troops. So accidental war crimes, but not on purpose, actually. A red line is that now officers command really do not hesitate, also use war crimes or violations of the international law by committing war crimes against the prisoners, etc., or civilian population, etc. And this is now on purpose, and the responsible are those officers which are in command. And of course, the highest, like the president of the country. And a next red line is that war crimes become an integral part of the war strategy. So it's not by accident, more or less, or that in some situations you do not hesitate to commit war crimes, but you do it. Like we could see it also in the Balkan War, for instance, when the Muslim population was genocide killing of people or raping women, etc. And this is one. Or if also, but it's still on 8. It's not that they already risk their own complete falling into the abyss, as I call the 9th step.
Mutual destruction. Both die.
Yeah. Even at the risk of, I will die as well, like you die. But there are also other red lines still on stage 8, like direct attack of the civilian people or objects, etc. Also first, by accident, as a kind of a collateral damage, and later it becomes an explicit aim to destroy this. Then the energy supply or the infrastructure, rail system, etc. So you can see various red lines. And at the beginning, people refrain from this. They are aware of the fact that this would mean a severe escalation. And then they decide, yes, I do this. And I take the risk.
Yeah, and that's this one of these huge problems, right, on each step. We have that even within the nuclear logic, that there's people in the US and in Russia who both say we should use tactical nukes, just the little ones, this is not a real escalation, it's just a little bit more, and then the other one will be so scared they will stop. But it just feeds further into pushing each other into mutual assured destruction.
And as you used the term, a little is a limitation, and then the limitation changes. It's getting more and more and more. So what one calls the doses of violence, is increased and increased because you use it, now I do it. Tit for tat. We know this mechanism. And for instance, if you look at the delivery from the United States of dispersing arms, I don't think that's the right
cluster
term.
bombs. Cluster bombs.
Oh,
Cluster bombs.
Yes, cluster bomb. Yes, that's it. Yeah. The US government knows this is against international law. There exist international multilateral treaties and so, but now they do it. So this side and the other side is not any longer respecting these limitations, and therefore this is considered by the other party, okay, if you do it, then we do it, and a little bit more, as I call it. Yeah. So the amount of destructiveness is growing and growing, still having the idea of, but anyway, we will not start with the first strike using nuclear arms. But the second strike capacity is there.
But that's just the red line. It can be crossed, and once it's crossed for good. And that's the thing. So maybe I really regret that we don't have more time. I want to just 10 more minutes, just 10 more minutes, because this horrible escalation spiral, which if you let it go, it will naturally progress towards level 9, complete mutual assured destruction. And that's I mean, that's just very, very frightening. At the same time, you speak of windows of opportunity, but in the current situation, we have this huge problem that in the West, Russophobia and the hate toward the other, the logic of war, is already so far progressed that a lot of people actually really just wish death upon Russia and anything Russian. On the Russian side, we have the problem that that the promises of the West have been broken over and over and over, and that it is really hard for them to trust the US, and the US and the West trust the Russians. Trust is at its lowest. And thirdly, the Ukrainians have been lied to again and again, Budapest Memorandum and so on. They have like hundreds of reasons to distrust the Russians and to say like, no, we need to, regime change or like kill as many as we can. How can what would need to happen in order to get out of the spiral of death within this context?
That's what I emphasize many times. Looking at windows of opportunity, a window may open just a few millimeters or inches, but open. And if you see this, and then if you think we could make much more out of it. I mentioned in my lectures, etc. For instance, the deal which was
the grain
deal. Yes. Hungarian, Turkish and United Nations.
Mediation.
And the contract was limited. And this could have been used to prolong it. And also because Russia had original interest also to export, also via the Black Sea harbors. And there were mines, sea mines everywhere. So it was dangerous for Russian vessels to do the shipping of Russian harbor and other goods. And one could look at, are there situations in which there would also be some interest of this side as well of this side? Not an unlimited win-win, which an optimistic person as I am would hope. No, but see that it could be some more, and there you could do some more and get out some more of it. And this can be used to give evidence to each other. Okay, we give each other trust and limited trust, and we can control it and we check it. And if this proves to be observed actually by all of us, although there might be difficulties, then this may be a basis for a next step in which we rely again on the trustable relationship of those who are belligerent parties still in the battlefield. And if I if I look also, you may remember in St. Petersburg, there was a conference and the South African delegation was there, was welcomed by President Putin there. But at more and more, President Putin attacked then the South African delegation as being not realistic, and again accusing the West and the transatlantic treaty system, etc. So it was not successful, the attempt of the South African government. But if you look at the BRICS things which happened the last week now in South Africa, that some more countries and governments met there to establish a kind of an alternative of cooperation, and maybe something which can become a new architecture of peace and security.
Yeah.
Not like United Nations, a universal one, but including a lot of countries. So the idea is, can you look at this? Could it be expanded, enlarged, involve other, looking at not how can I punish, not how can I implement new sanctions if you are not fulfilling my demands, but can I offer you an advantage? And if you give a positive response, then instead of sanctions, negative sanctions, we enter into positive sanctions. We can do something which is of advantage for you, etc.
Just one problem that we have is that there are people who understand this, but then there's people who want to use escalation as a problem-solving mechanism, and we have them in Washington, we have them in Moscow, and we certainly have them in Kiev.
Yeah.
Now, of these three, who do you think has the most agency that if they overcome this stupidity, and I think this stupidity is especially outspoken in Washington and in Moscow, because Kiev, I mean, the
Kiev
Ukrainians fight because they have to fight. It's like, you know, when somebody shoots at you, you have to shoot back. So can neutral states or BRICS or like outside forces push both of them? Do you think it's realistic that they can push both of them to say, like, stop it, guys, this is it, we'll end it now?
Three of them. So Moscow, Washington, and Kiev. Also, Kiev is very dependent from on Washington, I would say, and Brussels. I mean, the NATO Brussels, not the EU Brussels, but the NATO Brussels.
Yeah.
And yes, I believe, I believe that this is possible. I am pleading already for some time for an alliance of the what one calls in economy the stakeholders. A company has stakeholders, their own employees and the management and those who give the capital, and then the community in which the manufacturing is situated, and then the country, and then some more. And also, let's say, the economy in general, and ecology, and so on and so on. And for all those, there exist organizations which have governance, etc. NGOs, for instance. So, briefly, what I'm pleading for is that like what happened now with the BRICS meeting and that new members will enter the BRICS, like Ethiopia and Argentina, etc. That those countries which are not involved in sanctions directly, there are quite a lot, yeah. So they can give evidence that they are not pro.
That they're neutral, yeah. They're actually neutral, the real neutrals, not the lapdog neutrals.
Yes, they are impartial. They are not neutral in terms of international law, but they are impartial, yeah, or metapartial. So those should form a kind of an alliance of the stakeholders, which then say whether the planet can survive or not, whether we success with our strategy to reduce the climate, etc., and so on and so on. So I'm not repeating all the all the aspects of the climate change problem, etc., and economy and inflation and starvation, problem of starvation and lack of food in the southern hemisphere, etc. That's why I welcome the BRIC. They are more and more speaking on behalf of the southern hemisphere, not all of them. And so if I only look at the attempts to rescue the planet from being overheated, etc., if you look at the damage which is caused by all the use of all the weapons, the conventional weapons, not to talk about the nuclear weapons, etc., which are even more horrible, but all that, what the emissions of the warfare are, they are counteracting a lot of the measures which have been taken years ago.
I mean, just at the Nord Stream pipeline is the largest emission of methane gas ever. I mean, this is ridiculous, of course.
I agree, yes. So I hope you understand what I mean with the stakeholders.
Yeah.
The impartial, and if they then choose for neutrality in terms of international law, that means equal treatment of the belligerent parties, and not allowing the one to fly over your territory or so and so, or to buy to sell weapons to them and to refuse selling to them. So if they say we are really talking, speaking, expressing the interests of mankind, which is a little bit pathetical, yeah, but these are really the interests of all the people in the world, including Russians, including Americans, yeah. So it's also for your sake as well. And instead of using more and more of the oil and gas, etc., in the war, we should start thinking now of a strategy after ceasefire and after we have achieved a kind of a peace treaty, in order that all the countries, even Russia, become more independent from oil and gas, etc., and we develop alternative energy sources, etc., etc. So an invitation and offering actually of cooperation, because we have this problem. It's not that this country has it and this country not. I remember that even in 2021, President Putin in a conference said, although we have tremendous differences on the political aspects, etc., we have one common problem together, and therefore we should cooperate. And he was referring to the ecological problems.
So you see a hope in pressure from neutral and non-aligned states on the belligerent parties to actually work on common problems and thereby kind of find a common way out of the spiral. Is that the hope?
Yeah, it's not only pressure, it's also invitation. You you offer kind of an advantage, actually, yeah, not a disadvantage, and a positive sanction. So if we agree on this, then we stop with this sanction, and you are again a member of the international monetary system, etc., etc. And so it is moral pressure, more than political pressure, and
on all three.
On all three, yes, yeah. And I think you studied as well the 12 positions which have been offered by the Chinese government at the Munich Security Conference in 25th of February of this year, when we were talking about the Ukrainian war, the 12 positions of the Chinese government. And you may remember the immediate reaction of President Biden on this. Really, I can't help, but it was so ignorant and so arrogant. He did not refer to any of the 12 points or positions in terms of content. He just generally said it's just a propaganda act, nothing more.
So the question is, because the interesting thing is neither Moscow nor Kiev said no. They didn't say yes, but neither said no. So the question is, how can, for example, India or some other state sell the same idea to the Americans and tell them, look, it's actually your own idea because you're the heroes, so that they can say face. So that would have to happen, right? This cooperation among the neutrals, the ones who are closer here and closer there.
I would rather say Brazil and South Africa, Brazil. So because they can say, we do what we can do to stop the destroying of the forest, the rainforest, etc., because of our concern for the climate, etc. So while India is delivering, weapons and also drone to the Russian government, you may know. And therefore, Brazil is more impartial, actually, than in this case, India. But the BRICS community, of course, includes, and I think if all of them, even if they to some extent supported Russian interests, because India is buying cheaper oil as an effect of the sanctions of Europe against the oil, the Russian oil. So of course they benefit from this, but anyhow, in terms of this, what I called the activity to save the planet and the economy and from starvation, etc., and the health problems worldwide, etc., I really am convinced that it is possible that the three, Washington, Kiev, Moscow, could listen to them. And yeah, I'm busy with this, also with one of the mentioned capitals. Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that you're involved. The problem is we need a good coincidence when all three, for different reasons, come to the same conclusion.
That's good. Yeah.
I hope you can sell it to one of them, and then somebody like Ken Cloak or some others, they sell it to the others, and we end this war as all European wars end with a big conference. Yeah. I hope we get there sooner than later. Dr. Friedrich Glasl, thank you very much for your valuable time.
Thank you for the opportunity.